have come to hear Margaret's presentation, General Stores and Draperies in Rural South Australia. Margaret's a very active member of the Society. She spoke to us in 2002 on her grandfather's outback odyssey by motor vehicle to Darwin via Central Australia in 1925, and she serves on the Society's council. Margaret has researched one family's 130-year involvement in retail stores, and tonight will offer us a case study based on oral history, original photographs, newspaper advertisements and family papers. So please welcome Margaret Ford to give her presentation, General Stores and Draperies in Rural South Australia.
Good evening, and thank you for coming on this journey tonight. Well, let's go shopping and see how it used to be done. If we entered a general store of my great uncle, James Callaghan in Gawler, we would have seen that a general store sold these kind of items: grocery, wine, crockery, ironmongery, and whenever you see that, just translate that to hardware. Bedsteads, china, glass, earthenware, and of course all at city prices. He also bought fresh produce from the locals, eggs, fruit, and sold them on, so he was a grocer as well. Families waited on at home, customers punctually attended to. Good, friendly customer service. Next door to Callaghan's was his father-in-law's shop, Theodore Engelbrecht's shop. And this was a drapery store. This picture was taken in the 1870s, and I'm sorry that the quality isn't as good as I'd like, but it's the only one I've got. And a drapery store would sell things like this: hosiery, gloves, prints and ginghams, materials, fancy dress, English and foreign silks. Never any mention back then of what was made in Australia. Shawls and mantles were coats. Millinery and straw goods, baby linen and ladies' underclothing, table linen and sheetings, Irish linens, table covers, and so it goes on. All of those things which we might describe as soft goods. My great-great-grandfather, Theodore Engelbrecht, came from Germany in 1850, and by 1853 had opened an ironmongery store in Hindley Street. Then he went to Rundle Street, and we wish he'd kept the real estate. Then he went to Gawler. And his shop, this shop, is in the building today, which is the Bunyip newspaper office. The young girl in the picture, this is my great-grandmother, Caroline, her mother, and her sister, who's already married one of the Callaghans. And the baby carriage in the picture is the first Callaghan baby. And in those days, 1870s, Main Street of Gawler, people displayed their goods out the front of their shop in the main. Some of the stores were darker inside, so you put the display out the front. And I'll talk a little more about plate glass windows and window displays, but in those days, small panes of glass for windows. But because your goods were out the front, there was a problem. Murray Street was dirt, and all of the horses going past kicked up the dust, and the dust became a soiling device for all of those goods. So the council, in its wisdom, decided to buy a watering van to water the street. But alas, as soon as they did that, it wet all the manure that was on the street. So instead of allaying the dust and keeping everyone happy, it caused a pong. So then, to keep up with Adelaide, they bought a roller brush so that they could water the street and sweep up the droppings. Theodore's daughter, Caroline Engelbrecht, married an employee who worked in her father's shop. So John Ford married the boss's daughter. And Theodore had accumulated quite some property by this time, so it was a good match. John was born in England in 1846 in Devon. He was the second son of a yeoman farmer, and he came out with a small inheritance. And for 2 years after his marriage, he worked in the shop with his father-in-law. And then in 1883, he decided to set out on his own, and he moved to this shop in Morfett Street. The people whose name is on this shop now were there much, much later. And my grandfather was born above this shop in 1886. And he was the Richard Ford who made the journey from Adelaide to Darwin and back. But we're still with his father at the moment, so it was John Ford. Now, this streetscape in Adelaide has all but totally disappeared. The only roofline that's the same is the extreme right, and it's the old Adelaide Girls High School. Then John and his brother-in-law James decided to make their fortunes in Broken Hill, and so off they set. Broken Hill had just been connected to the railway, by railway to Adelaide in 1888, and this picture was taken in 1887. It was a little more like a mining camp than a mining town in those days. Typhoid was rife, water was very hard, and John and James were looking to make their fortune because goods were expensive, and they did their best. They became general storekeepers, so John put his drapery skills together with James's general store skills, and to me it's always seemed like a Wild West town at this stage in the development of Broken Hill, because even the two-storey pub there is called the Denver City Hotel, run by Elliott's. I found some advertisements. It was very exciting to find advertisements for your ancestors. Basically, this one is for teas that they had imported, and it's encouraging the women to shop in there, come into the shop, because it's saying we've got the millinery. And one of the clever gimmicks to advertise your wear was to link it with the big stores in Adelaide. So they're saying that our dressmaking department is under the supervision of Miss Lecky, who has been with J. Miller Anderson's in Adelaide. If you wanted to have status as a shopkeeper, then you made a big fuss of the fact that you were an importer. And you would tell people what ship your goods had come in on. So the SS Austral was the ship that brought the blankets and rugs to Adelaide to get on the train to bring them up to Broken Hill. Now imagine today if we went to Target to buy Stella McCartney X Qantas QE2. Not done today, but it made people look as if they were more important, and if you wanted to be the top of the tree, as some of the big stores in Adelaide did, you also had an office in London. Unfortunately, in Broken Hill they had a disaster. Uncle Kevin used to say he lost all the shares, he lost all his inheritance. That's where all our money went, in that fire. The fire was a disaster. It burnt a whole block in Argent Street, and the John Ford and Callaghan business was insured for £3,000 and they lost 8. So for the rest of his life, John Ford always paid his insurance premiums, and he kept his insurance docket inside the band of his hat, so it was always at hand. The day after the fire in Argent Street, there was a lot of looting and a lot of interesting things happened. Some of the newspaper descriptions are quite amusing to our modern ears. People threw crockery out into the street from some of the shops to save it. Sergeant Saunders rushed into Finn's bar and ran off with one of the barmaids to save her. Broken Hill didn't work out, so they came back to Gawler, back to the Engelbrecht shops. By this time, Theodore Engelbrecht had died, and John and James went back to the shops that their mother-in-law still had. So John, the noted cheap cash draper, this is the 1890s, times are hard, unemployment is high, and when that happens to shopkeepers, you sell the basics. You keep to cheap things and you're looking for cash. Within a few months, he was showing some indication that things weren't going too well, and the gold had been discovered in Western Australia. The Bunyip reported that lots of people went off to the gold fields in Western Australia trying to make their fortune. At one point they said John Ford had done that with his brother-in-law, Theodore Jr., but he in fact went north to Orroroo. As the railway opened up, people followed the railway to establish their new businesses. My father used to always answer the phone and say, "The Mayor of Orroroo here," but he was a bit of a scallywag. And in later years, the Fords established shops in Carrieton and Wilmington as well. And by this time, their son Richard was growing up. Now, Orroroo has always had a reputation for being a windy place. And this was a cartoon to explain that that was something that other people noticed too. When Charles Todd was asked in 1882 to establish a post office in Orroroo, he said, "Why would you want a post office here? There's only 2 letters in the town." My aunts always have said that in Orroroo the crows used to fly backwards to keep the dust out of their eyes. And of course, since the blue bush is no longer being ploughed and people aren't now expecting north of Orroroo to be the new wheat bowl of the state, the dust is not quite as bad as it used to be. My aunt, who's 94, said that after a dust storm, the first thing you took inside was a wheelbarrow and shovel to get the bulk of it out, and then you took the brush in and the dusters in later. In 1937, Orroroo celebrated its 50th anniversary, and they published a book, which is on the table if you'd like to have a look. I've always loved going to Orroroo, and from being a tiny girl I used to go up there and stay with aunts and uncles and sit under the benches in the shop and watch all the people come and go. It's near to the Flinders Ranges, it's near to the arid lands of South Australia, it's on the banks of the Peakner Creek, and it has an outback beauty that I always think is rather wonderful. It is, however, on Goyder's line, and that meant that while they expected in 1893, when John Ford went to Orroroo, that things would progress, that farming would bloom and blossom and people would make lots of money, that didn't turn out to be the case. By 1900, Orroroo had a population of 2,100 in the town and on the surrounding farms. And this is a small community by today's standards. It's smaller than Port Eliot's population at the moment, 2/3 of the population of Port Eliot today. The majority of the population were farmers, graziers and labourers, but included a wide range of other occupations. In 1920, for example, Orroroo boasted 3 hotels, 3 banks. Imagine having 3 banks in a town today. 3 bakers, 4 blacksmiths, 3 masons, 2 millers, 2 saddlers, 2 tinsmiths, and 3 wheelwrights, as well as many, many others. And Orroroo supported 3 general stores. The Ford businesses were draperies, then general stores. The goods moved backwards and forwards a bit. I guess, to be correct, they were more often drapery stores inside a general store. And I've said to people who lived in the town, how could a town of that population support 3 general stores? Well, said Brian Dowling, son of one of the former publicans, one week we gave our order to Ford's, the next to Acklands, the next to Fogden's, everyone got a turn. The population shopped loyally and locally. This is the shop that John Ford opened in 1893, and when he opened it initially, it was a drapery. It wasn't an auspicious start because his 3-year-old daughter died a week after the shop was opened. In fact, over a 5-year period leading up to 1893, his sister-in-law had died, his wife had died, and 2 of his children, and his parents back in England. And I've often wondered about the grief that that man must have suffered. He announced in a newspaper advertisement, "Good news to the residents of Orroroo and surrounding districts." And he must have been hoping for some good news for himself by this time after the fire as well. John Ford, late of Gawler, begs to announce that he has opened a cash drapery store at which they can obtain all classes of new and fashionable goods at Adelaide prices. As it turned out, Orroroo was good to the Ford family. And the business went from John Ford to John Ford and Son to Richard C. Ford, later Orroroo Cash and Carry, and eventually Ford Brothers. This is the Orroroo shop today. They've tampered with the facade and spoilt it, but it's still there today. And Orroroo seems to be having a resurgence because the road from Orroroo to Hawker has now been totally bitumised, and so it's another way to go to the Flinders Ranges, and it's good for the tourist trade. So where in the 1980s Orroroo was a sad place to visit, and Grandpa's house looked as if nobody loved it, now things are picking up again. Richard Coker Ford, John Ford's son, was born above the shop in Morfett Street that I showed you. He was born in 1886. And I suspect he had much more get up and go than his father, but then his father had suffered lots of tragedies. I wished I had been older to know my grandfather better. I suspect he was a very eccentric man. In 1908, he went to Western Australia to work with his uncle's business and another business in Geraldton. He also gained some experience in Adelaide, working at the Coliseum in Rundle Street, which was a high-class dress shop. And in 1908, he married a local girl in Geraldton and brought her back to Orroroo. My dad remembers Pop had the shop very well stocked and was a good businessman, all drapery, footwear, menswear, millinery. He even had a bootmaker working for him. He was an exceptionally good salesman. He could sell anything. If a chap went in to buy 1 shirt, he'd come out with 3. He used to go down to G&R Wheels and buy up all the samples. Any traveller's samples or boots, and take them back and sell them for a cheap price. He was a very good window dresser. Now we look at this picture today and think, well, it's just a picture of a shop window. But in 1908, this picture made national news. The Orroroo Enterprise reported this: "The friends of Mr. Dick Ford will be pleased to read the following complimentary reference to him, which appeared in the December issue of the Draper of Australia. The window was dressed by Mr. R. Ford for Mr. Smith of Geraldton, Western Australia." And then for about 3,000 words it goes on to explain everything that's in that window. 4 arched, bordered with softly puffed blue and white chiffon arranged against the glass. Now for years I looked at this picture and couldn't quite work out the significance of it, and then realised that the plate glass windows were the big innovation. Before this, there were small panes of glass. And window dressing and window displays were the cheapest form of advertising. The article describes in minute detail strips of pink and white cotton, white lace curtains with pale blue silk chiffon upon which sprays of flowers were placed, supported by hat pins to give the effect of growing. And so it goes on. Richard C. Ford, or Dick Ford as he was always known, was a great entrepreneur. And he bought a hawker's van and went bush to the north of the state to sell goods as well as having the shop in Orroroo. His father was still working there at the time. This is 1915, but John had, to a greater or lesser extent, retired. For some station women, this hawker's van would be the only shopping that they might see for a year. So he was very popular. And he even bought a shop in Carrieton to the north so that he could have a depot there for extra goods, so he didn't have to keep going back to Orroroo to replenish his stocks. And as an entrepreneur, he would send that picture that I've just showed you with this on the back, a postcard, and notice it says, "Dear Madam," Sir doesn't get a mention, and he would put the date that he anticipated that he would arrive in their vicinity. And he made friends with all of these people. When he did his cross-Australia trip in 1925, he continued to add to this pool of people who purchased things by telegraph. And here's an example of a telegram that he received in 1921. From Newcastle Waters in the Northern Territory. Please send 1 dozen pair of trousers, sizes 4 and 5, 18 striped shirts with different stripes, 1 good rug about £3, 2 cheap rugs, 20 yards of strong double-width unbleached calico, 1 dozen yards of strong print, 1 dozen reels of white sewing cotton by next mail, Harry Battern. That's quite an order. Richard had experienced a disrupted childhood. His mother died when he was 6, and 2 of his baby sisters died around the same time, and he didn't live with his father until he was a teenager. And I've always thought that he just used to like his hawking van to get away from the women. So by 1915, when he went hawking, he had 4 children of his own. By the end of his family, there were 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. Always the entrepreneur, he taught his children sign writing and advertising skills from an early age. I remember my father, the 4th child, having a drawer full of brightly coloured poster paints and expensive brushes for sign writing, which we must never touch. Words like sable were on these brushes. And he was proud of his sign writing skills that his father had taught him. And of course, this saved you money. You did your own advertising copy and your own advertising signs. So here he has decorated the carriage for his first 3 children. Jean is in the trolley, pulled by Bun, Glenn Lindsay was his name, but he was always called Bun. And he later managed the Carrieton shop, and Jack, who took over the Orroroo business. If you were going to be successful in business, you had to be the latest with the newest. The newest with the latest. Had to be up with the fashions and set the trends. These knives, which I have hanging in my house, causes a lot of comment when people call. My father always said that the top one was the first stainless steel bladed knife in South Australia. Whichever is the case, it does say, made in Sheffield for Richard C. Ford, Orroroo, Firth, stainless. And according to the State Library, it's quite possible that it could have been the first. Stainless steel was invented in 1913, and it took a while for the knives to come through. And never being one to miss an opportunity, when people came to the Ford household for dinner, they were impressed by these knives, which were branded with the name. So Grandpa had the second knife underneath made to sell sets in the shop. And as this is 1919, getting more adventurous with his advertising. I've always found this picture a little tarty myself, but he's selling camisoles and trying to attract the female customer. One of the things that my aunt passed to me that's always highly amused me is some underwear from this period. I've always referred to these as Grandma's knickers. And they have a brand on them, the Empire. There's an important part missing. And the reason for that was in those days you couldn't pull your skirts and stays up to get your knickers down. So you had to have another way of following what you needed to do occasionally. When he died, there was a trunk in Orroroo, and amongst it I found many, many papers, and lots of them were his scribbled writing of new copy for new ideas for advertising. And I think he really enjoyed trying to be different. So here he is slashing bargains. He also was quick to get in the newspaper when an opportunity arose. For example, Victoria Martin of Morchard was bitten by a snake at a farm near Morchard. She was taken to the doctor in Orroroo. Mr. R.C. Ford always said that he helped to save her life because she was wearing new cashmere stockings just bought from his shop. And this is Captain Harry Butler. In about 1920, he arrived in Orroroo, landed in the middle of the race course, and said he was willing to give joyrides. He was trying to set up an airmail business, and this plane finished up at Minlaton. While everyone else was lining up for the rides, Dick Ford rushed back to the shop, grabbed a great handful of pamphlets, and when his turn came, he got the pilot Harry to fly over the town and spread them. In 1925, some of you came to hear the story of when he and Eardley Forrester and George Hearn drove this Crossley car to Adelaide, from Adelaide to Darwin and back. And some people have already asked me whether we, as a family, did a reenactment of this, and we did. On the 80th anniversary, 2005, 9 of us set off in 4 sets of camping equipment, and we had a wonderful time retracing that journey. This was a picture I showed on that occasion. Near Farina, they had diff trouble and had to empty the sump of the oil. I think I've got the words right, I'm not very mechanical. And of course, Dick Ford had to write his name with the oil on the sand. Another innovative idea was establishing some writing pads that you could sell to customers. And on the front, he had the 3 pictures of his businesses at this stage. This is about the mid-1920s. At the top is his shop in Orroroo, in the middle his hawker's van, and at the bottom his original shop in Carrieton, which before it became the shop was the depot that he stored his goods in when he went hawking. John Martins used to cramp his style sometimes. They would come up with displays. They'd hire the Institute, they would set up a display, and of course people would buy from John Martins for a while, and if you came to town you did. But Dick always thought this was a bit unfair. So he used to set up displays in the Institute. And there is so much material in that picture. Coats, called mantles in those days. I'm not sure when a mantle became an overcoat. There's a little doll on the floor. Lots of price tickets, lots of advertising. Not just content to set up the display and hope that everyone would come, He had specially printed invitations, so no one could miss out on the fact that this was about to happen. And as I alluded to just a while ago, he decided to expand, and he opened a shop in Carrieton. Then they moved across the road, and before the Fords took this one over, it was a butcher shop. And if you have a look, so this shop was built in 1890s or so. Notice that the windows, no plate glass windows, tiny windows. You have to go inside to see what the shop is selling. Carrieton was about a third of the size of Orroroo. And in Orroroo, the Fords didn't sell petrol, but in Carrieton they did, because there was a need. And even though Carrieton was only a population of about 600, there were still, at times, 3 general stores in the town. How all these shops survived is really quite another story, I would imagine. There's no longer a shop in Carrieton, and this is a community store now. And the community look after it, and basically it's a place to buy a few tins of baked beans and pick up your mail, because they can't compete with the supermarkets. And then Grandpa decided a third shop was in order, so he established this shop at Wilmington. And I suspect some of the sign writing in this picture is my father's. In little print on the window, blown up at the bottom, I hope so you can see it, it says, "Of course, this is Ford's. Never one to miss an opportunity." My dad said, I went across to Wilmington and we opened up a branch there, which was a much bigger shop. I started off there with one girl in the drapery side and brother Kevin there with me. I was there until 1939. At Wilmington we had a house at the back of the shop. We used to sleep there and have our meals in the hotel. There were 2 bedrooms, a kitchen and a big spare room. It was a bit rough. I used to shower at the hotel. Shop hours used to be from 8 until 6 on weekdays, Dad told me. On Saturdays it was from 8 until 1. When Kevin, brother Kevin, my father's brother, took over the hardware shop and was the last Ford trading in Orroroo, he commented that one of the most annoying things for the shopkeeper was the customer who wanted him to reopen after shop hours. Well, one day Kevin told Auntie Het, "If anyone rings, I'm not home." The chappie on the phone asked her a question, and she said, "I don't know when you'll be home." The persistent customer asked again, "When would Kevin be home?" "Just a minute," says Auntie Het. "Kevin, what time will you be home?" The centenary book, the 50th anniversary book of Orroroo, 1937, has this picture of a few modern residences. This one was my grandfather's. But they used to hold dances on the lawn. The band would sit under the arch and people would dance on the lawn. The cricket club would have one week, the hospital, the golf club, everyone would take it in turns. And there was a truck that had multi-purposes. Now, Dick Ford had 5 boys and 2 girls. The boys were an asset to the shops but caused some headaches at times. Mr. von der Bosch, the police officer, extends heartfelt greetings to the whole of the people of Orroroo and District and wishes them a happy new year. He wishes to thank all the lads of the town for being so good on New Year's Eve, which is a record, as not as much as a stone was removed. Apparently they used to shift people's toilets. Dad said, when I was working at Orroroo, Kevin and I used to go out to the Wollawi Plains to collect butter and eggs. We'd keep wet cloths on it, but it was a bit soft by the time we got back to the shop. There was no refrigeration in those days. We used to store it all downstairs in the cellar. We'd deliver the goods in a Chev 6 truck. People would be expecting us. We got to know them very well and they got fed. Sometimes people would be a bit poor and couldn't pay in cash, so we'd take chickens, roosters, calves, anything that would make up the money. Occasionally we'd buy a bag of wheat. We always had a yard full of calves and fowls at home. We'd give the customer cash for butter and eggs and deduct what they owed for groceries. During harvest time, we'd take out binder twine, sewing twine, ploughshares, cultivars. There was not too much that we didn't sell. We'd take out their mail and their newspapers. And on Friday night, we'd load up the truck with eggs and butter and take it down to Adelaide. Then we would backload and bring goods back. We'd go to Woodson's for general grocery items and deliver the butter to the men's biscuit factory. Various places used to buy eggs, and we fitted 21 dozen in a kerosene tin packed in cocky chaff. Apart from collecting orders with the truck, Uncle Pat, the youngest boy, used to drive around the town on his bicycle and collect orders. And for those customers who were frail, he would deliver with the basket on the back of the bike. And he was a very popular figure. The truck wasn't just used for work, it was also used for courting. And Jack was allowed to drive the truck, and he would drive all the young people off to a dance. Now, when the courtship got serious for the eldest Ford's son, he was in the market for an engagement ring. And the Fords always shopped with Wentz in Adelaide. Loyalty of customers was a hallmark of shopping in those days. So Jack Ford sent to Adelaide for an engagement ring. Up came a selection on APRO from Wentz. The fiancé chose the ring and the others were sent back. An invoice for the ring followed. Imagine doing that today. This is the Carrieton shop. Dad's brother Glenn Lindsay, always known as Bun, took over the Carrieton shop around about the war. The war really had a big impact on the family, and 4 of the 5 boys went away to fight. Bun had to stay behind because someone had to look after the welfare of the wives and children who were coming along at that stage. And the catchphrase at the time was "We lead and others follow." So even though this is the Carrieton shop, it still says Orroroo, Cash and Carry. But it was in Carrieton. So I guess this is a chain, not quite as big as Woolworths. Dockets. I've blown up a part of this docket from 1943 just to show you some of the range of what was sold. So on this occasion, there's a calendar, torch cells, bread, oranges, mandarins, peas, an egg beater, a broom, paint, batteries, vegetables, and so on. The general store sold everything. The war made things difficult for everyone with rationing. And here are some ration coupons that were collected at the Carrieton shop. So the stamp says G.L. Ford, Carrieton, and cancelled, and that one's for Motor Spirit. And people received their ration tickets, you took them to the shopkeeper stamped it, and then used these cancelled ones to get his next order of whatever it was, in this case, petrol. Here are some other ration tickets for tea. H, we believe, is for hosiery. Even in 1949, there was still rationing for tea. S for sugar. and I'd love to know what V meant. We don't think it's vegetables because, for many reasons, but if anyone knows what the V was for, I'd love to hear. The most tedious task in these little general stores was stock taking. And Bun's stock take with his wife, Edie, would take 1 to 2 weeks, and their 4 children were told to go and amuse themselves for a couple of weeks. This is Edie's stock taking book, everything written in pencil, pages and pages and pages for 1 year. It took ages to do, and shows some of the range of goods that they sold. So this one's got boots on it, and it's how many pairs, how much per pair of boots, and then the total cost, and then the next size pair of boots, and so it went on. Lace and all the different kinds. You'd have to measure how many yards you had, how much a yard, tally it up, and then add all these things together. No wonder my cousin Robert said they had a great time during stocktake. By the 1980s, shopping patterns had changed and people travelled to buy their goods. And in 1983, the last Ford shop in Orroroo closed, Kevin Ford shop. Notice Buller hanging up on the wall. Grandpa's favourite dog, a bulldog, was called Buller, and he was so devastated when this dog died. He had the dog skinned and the hide tanned so he could keep his dog. The other story that my aunt told me was one day they were making a window display for Mother's Day, and the girls had spent hours getting this display pretty and delicate so that all the women of the town would come and buy their goods. And a farmer from Peekner came in with a dead calf head, a 2-headed calf, of course, that had died. So Grandpa just swooped a place in this window dressing to show the calf. He thought it was wonderful. And the girls all threatened to resign if he didn't take it out instantly. So in 1983, the last Fords retired. And it was the end of an era. So 130 years from when the first Engelbrecht shop started in 1853, and 90 years of the Fords in Orroroo. And I still enjoy going up there and having a look, and my cousins are slowly infiltrating the town and the Fords are taking over again. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you. Earlier there was a photo of the shop in Morford Street. Do you know what year you vacated that?
Yes. They were there from 1883 until 1888 when they went to Broken Hill.
And then it became a chemist shop.
No, the chemist shop was next door.
Oh, next door,
yes,
was it?
There were, but there was the drapery
yes.
store, the 2-storey, and next to it was a chemist shop. Do you know what year they were all knocked down?
Oh yes, I can tell you something about that. It was arranged to have the shop knocked down long after I left, but the wreckers came. It didn't belong to me. I was merely an apprentice, but that shop was knocked down 2 days before it was supposed to be, and underneath the ground, the cellar is a mass of beautiful glass bottles filled with all sorts of exotic things. So some archaeologist is going to have a good time one day. I think it might have been around about, I left in 1956.
That
It was probably about 58 it got knocked down. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Robert Ford.
Margaret, did the Orroroo shop have a flying fox arrangement for?
Yes, it did. I haven't. It had. I've spoken to my aunt about those wonderful things when you gave your money and across it went. They did have that for some years, but the more I tried to find out when and how long it was there, the more muddled she got and I decided I didn't have enough good information to include it. But we did. They were up to the moment, those Fords. As you know, Robert. I remember one story. I'll just tell you one last story. The police officer, that poor Mr. von der Borsch, he must have had a wonderful time. These Ford boys got up to lots of mischief. And he arranged for Dad to go to Peterborough and collect the Archbishop, who was coming up on a visit. And Dad was about 20 at the time, and yes, it was fine and all planned and whatnot. And Dad went to see the policeman a couple of hours before he was due to leave and said, "Do you think I should get a licence?"
Thank you very much, Margaret. I think the way in which your audience has responded tonight is an indication of how much they enjoyed your presentation, from the very early days to the more recent times of what was obviously a thriving town, but most importantly a thriving family business, and the way in which the community supported that I found quite impressive. I also found a couple of memories of my own, and the general stores and what have you, a little before my time, but sometimes the philosophy didn't change, and that was when I worked at the Kadina Council. We'd quite often have an approach from an outside organisation to hire our town halls in Kadina, Moonta or Wallaroo and bring up truckloads of clothes or carpets or whatever. And the boss's attitude always was, no, we've got perfectly good local business. And I was reminded of that with the display from John Martin's. And I also thought of the comment of a man in that part of the world who opened a supermarket, I think in Moonta, probably in the early 70s. And I can clearly remember him saying that I closed down the small shops overnight. And I think he was quite proud of that. But it really was the signal that the times were changing. So it's obviously a topic it's a family interest, but it's also something you've looked into very deeply, very professionally, and we're privileged that you were able to share it with us this evening.